It's an absolute pleasure to have Antonia here. Thank you so much. Antonia is one of the artists whose work is in the collection and is on display at the moment in the gallery space. So it's really fitting. And I don't know, do you want to introduce yourself and in a broader capacity? I'll hand over
Yeah,
to you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm Antonia Attwood. I'm an artist and I predominantly work in photography and video, but I do sculpture and other kind of mixed media pieces as well. Um, I have been working, I had a solo show at Bethlem, I think in 2017. So I've been working with the gallery for quite a long time now. Um, And yeah, it's been really lovely to reconnect to show an image that I'm going to show you from what the project is from today in the new show as well. So yeah, it's lovely to be reconnected with Bethlem. Um, in my other life, I am also I run a charity called Creative Health Camden. We're an arts charity based in a health centre, and I we run a workshop program and we create exhibitions all around the themes of health and well-being. I'm not going to talk too much about that today, but if anybody is interested in chatting to me about that, I'm more than happy to talk about it. But yes, I'm going to talk today more about my current body of work that I've been working on called Maybe It Was the Chicken Pox. So um, I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that? Perfect. So that's my name, obviously. So my project, maybe it was the chickenpox, started in about 2022 when I was diagnosed with a condition called psoriatic arthritis. And in my capacity at Creative Health Camden, we do a lot about art for healing and using art to process through illness. And so that's also what I do in my work as well. And so I'll talk through the project, but I think the project really helped me kind of understand myself, my diagnosis, what my body was going through, and picking all the emotions that come around with a diagnosis like this, and a huge life change that I had to do with um, different medications, living with chronic fatigue and chronic pain, which shifted a lot in my life. I had to change lots of things. And as I mentioned, my work predominantly is in photography and video, but I started integrating like painting into my work and textiles into my work because I was unable to go out with my camera when I was really unwell. So I spent a lot of time doing things that I was um, felt capable of doing whilst unwell, and that changed my practice a lot. So yeah. Oh, there we go. So one of the first things I started working on, again, this was in my studio. I was, unable to go out and walk with my camera as I used to be able to do. And so I started really looking at the kind of intricate details of my condition. And I'd been living with psoriasis, which is a skin condition where your cells develop like 10 times quicker than usual. And so you have this overproduction of cells, which creates red, flaky skin throughout your body. And I'd had that for about 10 years before I developed psoriatic arthritis, which is a condition that then still the overproduction of cells, but in the joints, which makes your joints really inflamed and painful. And I think when I was diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis, I wasn't quite ready to make work about that part of it yet because it was still so new to me and I was still working out what that looked like and what life with that looked like. Um, and so I started looking at where it all started back with my skin. And I kind of didn't realize how much, I went to university when I first was diagnosed with psoriasis, and I had kind of really flaky skin patches, and I would use creams, and I would manage it with kind of like horrible smelling shampoos and things like that. And I didn't really quite realize how big this was going to be. I thought it was just a kind of skin condition that I was going to be able to manage. And then when it kind of developed further into, I didn't even realize that psoriasis was an autoimmune disease. So it was affecting everything in my body, creating fatigue and all sorts. And so then when I was diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis, I spent a lot of time in hospital having tests, being prodded, poked, becoming a specimen. I was like having blood tests all the time, having x-rays, having MRIs, having scans, having ultrasounds, everything to try and find out what was going on. And I started then thinking like the doctors are looking at me as a specimen, and I want to take some of that power back and start learning about myself and looking at myself as this specimen. And I literally took the skin cells off of my body that were falling off because of my psoriasis, and I was putting them under a microscope that I found and bought in a charity shop. And so I was taking these photographs of the skin cells underneath a microscope, and I was really interested in this idea of like they this is literally my skin, and that's kind of gross and it's quite grotesque, but they become kind of like crystal-like and like precious stones and quite beautiful in its own right. And these tiny cells in my body, these like minuscule things, were like having a huge impact on my life and on my well-being. And yeah, I also wanted to look at this idea of me being a specimen in terms of like, when you go and walk around and collect bugs when you're a kid and you put them in these specimen boxes like ladybirds and butterflies and stuff, and this idea of looking at tiny creatures close up. So I started taking these images that I'd made with the microscope and putting them into specimen boxes to actually kind of like, you open them and look at them and see inside of yourself as a specimen. And again, like they look like kind of beautiful stones, beautiful crystals or something, but that actually, when you think about what they really are, it's kind of like this is a, a kind of remnants of what my body does to attack itself, and how my body is constantly attacking itself. But I was wanted to kind of change the narrative on that and change the narrative of doctors just using me as a specimen and actually start looking at myself. Um, and as I mentioned before, I was really struggling. My hands were painful, my shoulders were painful, my elbows were painful. Carrying equipment like a camera just became impossible for me at that time when I was really, really unwell. And so I would go to my studio and start painting. And again, I was looking at this idea of the skin. So the image on the left is actually, you can buy from the internet when you're becoming a tattoo artist. You can buy these latex sheets that you practice tattooing on, and they become like the skin. They are supposed to replicate tattooing onto the skin. And what I did was I ordered these latex sheets, and I was stretching them and pulling them and painting on them and breaking them, and kind of like this quite visceral uh, process where I was like fully like going into the skin and what the skin, the skin is the biggest organ of your body and it's supposed to protect you. It's a protective layer on the outside of our body, but actually what it was doing to me was damaging me. Became a kind of enemy of mine, if that makes sense. My skin was like I was fighting against it constantly. Um, and then the second image is of I started getting a canvas, and it was just a completely blank canvas. I don't know anything about painting. I started throwing paint on it. Again, thinking about this idea of the skin and layering that with makeup and latex again, and peeling the latex off and then layering it again with latex and more makeup. And often I would use makeup and things to cover up my skin because I felt insecure about it. And I was kind of, again, trying to retell that story of like, put my story onto this canvas that was of this layering and breaking and kind of peeling back these skin layers. And yeah, I'm sure kind of what these paintings are, but they were definitely of a time when I was processing everything that I was going through, and was very, very unwell. And like I said, I'm not painter, I'm not trained as a painter. I just was more interested in this, like the act of making the painting and layering and processing my emotions into that painting. And I was reading a lot at the time as well, because I was spending a lot of time in bed. And I was reading a book called uh, The Invisible Kingdom by Megan O'Rourke, which is a really interesting book if anybody wants to read it, about illness. And she says a quote that really resonated with me in this book. So I'm going to read it to you. It says, "To become chronically ill is to not only have a disease that you have to manage, but to have a new story about yourself. My own illness journey has no destination. Rather, it is a sum of all the ways it has taxed me and surprised me, all the accommodations and limitations it has brought with it, the suffering I underwent, the pride I felt at times at having endured and having persisted." And I felt really like, yes, this is a new story for me. I've never made work about chronic health before, obviously. Most of my work previously was about mental health conditions. And it did change my life in so many ways, but it also, um, and I suffered, but I also feel immense pride in how I used my art practice. And what's that saying? Like, when life hands you lemons, make lemonade. Like, this brought about a whole new story about me. And I hope that comes across in this body of work, because that's kind of what this body of work is, this new story of me and myself and my journey, and how it changed me, and how I'm so proud of in how I did endure it, and how I persevered through it, and how I've got to where I am today. So yeah, this was a really turning point in the journey. So this is a series of photographs called Enthesitis. And when I was going to the hospital a lot to find out what was wrong with me, I spent 2 years trying 6 different types of medication. And you have to try each type of medication for 3 months before you know if it's even worked, because it has to go through a full blood cycle of your blood. So the medication is designed to attack your immune system and your white blood cells, which are overproducing, and to tell them, guys, stop, calm down, you need to not fight, not be in fight mode all the time. And it wasn't until 2 years when I was sitting in an appointment with the doctor, and I was explaining to him how the pain actually felt. And I was saying it's like this shooting pain outside of my joint. So it starts in the joint, but it goes like down my arm, or down my leg, or it kind of comes out of it. And he was like, okay, I just want to do some more tests on you. Obviously, more tests, always more tests. And he was doing some ultrasound scans of the joints in my body. And he was like, look at where the red patches are on your ultrasounds, which is where the blood pulls together, and that's what causes the inflammation. And they were all kind of on the outside of all of my joints. And he said, I think what you've got is a offshoot of arthritis, which is actually called enthesitis, which is the inflammation of the tendons that surround the joints. And it took me 2 years for anybody to listen to how that pain felt in order to get this diagnosis. And one of the reasons why the medication that I'd been trying for 2 years hadn't been working is because they were treating me with anti-rheumatic drugs, which are treated for arthritis. And when actually what I had was enthesitis. And the frustration that came with that I was 2 years into this process of trying to find the right medication. And I felt if somebody had just listened to what I was saying at the start of this, maybe we would have got to the point where I found the correct medication a lot faster. So that idea of the patient voice being really important, like doctors need to listen to what we're saying in detail to be able to correctly diagnose us. And I was walking through the park with my camera again. That's my way of coping, of dealing with things. I was at my local park, and I kept seeing these burls on the trees. I didn't really know what they were called even. I had to go back to my studio and do some research as to what they're called, but they're called tree burls. And it happens to trees when you put them under stress. So that might be stress from like an insect going in there, someone chopping off a branch. But when trees are under stress, they create these bumps onto the outside of the tree that is a kind of protective casing. And so I just started photographing these like bumps and lumps in the trees. And I really resonated with those kind of like imperfections in nature and how that like resonated with the imperfections on my own skin. And then I found this tree, which is in the middle. And it was after this appointment, and it looked to me like a tendon in your body. And I was like, that's, I just took a photo of it and I went back to my studio and I was like, that is this idea of like my tendons being inflamed, and the way I was seeing myself mirrored in nature was so kind of profound to me. Um, and yeah, it again, it's just this idea of just using the creative process to process. Like you call it a process because it's about processing. It's about processing what you're going through. And this day just spent out walking in nature, which I do a lot for my health as well. Really helped me process a lot of those frustrations and feelings when I saw, they say like you feel not alone when you speak to other people about who have the same experiences as you. Well, actually, I felt not alone because I was seeing what I was going through in nature, and I thought this is a natural thing that's happening to me, and it's mirrored within nature. Um, and again, I was looking at this. This is kind of what changed slightly now, but I was thinking about these spaces where I heal. So this photograph on the left is an image of the sunbed. So when I was having real bad problems with my skin was so bad on my back that it was getting infected. I was actually not on the advice of a doctor because you're not supposed to, but I was going to the sunbeds to help give my skin vitamin D to try and heal my skin. And then when I was really sick and was diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis, the fatigue was so bad and the pain was so bad that I was spending days and days on end in bed. And I was thinking about this idea of being ill and how actually when you're ill, you spend a lot of time horizontal, you spend a lot of time lying down. Um, and that act of lying down is something that I think everybody who is unwell can kind of resonate with, that feeling of just like being bedbound, being unwell is really about lying horizontally. And they are spaces that I would lie in to hopefully restore myself, to get better, to help myself heal. Um, and I this piece has actually kind of evolved slightly. And the image on the left, I've now printed it onto a piece of metal. So you view the image, actually a curved piece of metal. And in order to view the image in the gallery space, you have to lie under it to actually view the image. And I want people to view these images by putting themselves into the position of the person that's unwell, by physically making somebody lie down to view it. And then the other one I've just printed on textile, on fabric. I've printed the photograph on fabric and I'm going to make a huge pillow out of it. And again, I want this pillow to be on the floor so people can lie down and understand what it means to, try and empathize with what it means to be unwell by putting yourself in the physical position of somebody who's unwell. Oh, my laptop's not charging. Um, Sorry, I think that's fine now. My laptop's telling me it's about to run out of battery. So these again, I was taking photographs of my skin, and I was thinking about this idea of like the extra skin cells on my skin as like, again, looking at nature, like when food goes moldy, it creates excess cells on the skin, and that's what creates the mold. And my studio, who I share the person I share a studio was very happy because I started growing mold in our studio, and I was photographing it with like a macro lens again up really close, and I was like looking at it as like these kind of landscapes. They started to look like landscapes on the moon, like, so the first image is actually my skin, photographed really close up with a macro lens, and you can see where the skin cells are peeling off it. And then the second image is a piece of bread that went moldy, and then I was photographing the mold really close up with a macro lens on the top of the bread, and they kind of look like the surface of the moon or some sort of like landscape. And I was again interested in this idea of like nature and landscapes coming into the human experience as well, and that crossover. I don't know what time it is, but I'll keep going. Shout me if I'm going for too long. And then I took those images of the mold and I photographed joints in the body. So the wrist, the elbow, the knee, the ankle. And I was overlaying the images of the mold onto these images of the body parts. And I was really interested in this idea of like, you know, when you're at school and you make maquettes of the moving body parts and you use split pins to put into the body and then you can move them around. So I was like pinning them together with split pins and moving these body parts around. And actually, this again has been now moved into even larger. So I printed these body parts at 1 meter by 1 meter, so they're huge, and they are printed on neoprene. So the idea is that they actually will go on the floor as a floor piece. And I can show you actually because I've got on here, giant split pins. So that they're actually like will be to scale like this size. Um, and then there will be a big, huge floor piece where people can interact with it and move the joints and move the body parts around within the gallery space. And again, I'm really interested in this idea that people actually interact with the work, that it just doesn't stay static on the wall, but this idea of like sculpture and designing the gallery space to force people to kind of like immerse themselves into it and interact with the work. Um, this is a work in progress that I haven't finished yet, but I was interested in when you're diagnosed with psoriasis, and I got this off the Psoriasis Association's website, it's a list of treatments. And when you're first diagnosed, the first treatment that you get told to is moisturizer. Moisturize your skin, keep your skin moisturized, that will help. And as you work through this list, it goes from like moisturizer to these kind of the names just get stranger and stranger as you go down the list of what more kind of intense medications you start to be on. So you go to like Dovabet, you go to Betnovate. And to me, it kind of gave this like weird list of my journey from starting with skin psoriasis all the way through to psoriatic arthritis. So I was, you know, first of all, I was using Dovabet, I was using Betnovate, I was using Betamuse, I was using hydrocortisone cream, I was using cold tar. And each time I was like, and then when I was diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis, I was using methotrexate, and then I tried adalimumab, and then I tried Cimzia, and then I tried etanercept, and it was like I tried touts, and it kind of became like a historic list of everything that I had tried to get to the point now where I'm actually on a medication that works for me. And so the idea for this video is that I'm going to read these names of all of these medications as they get stranger and stranger, and just have the mouth of the person reading it. And so you start to hear the like really strange words that you don't really understand and that nobody really understands. And these drugs are like heavy drugs, and you don't really understand what they are. But when you're unwell, you have to start to learn this new language that comes along with this crazy medication that you're taking. And yeah, I wanted to play it on a loop so that you can hear the start with just moisturizer. Everyone understands that language, and as you get to the end one, you just have no idea what this person is saying anymore. They just seem like meaningless words, which they kind of are. And I also worked on a project with in partnership with UCL Pearl. Pearl is the Person Environment Research Center. Person Environment something research. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a space within UCL where they test research methods at a one-to-one scale. And I worked with the Arts and Sciences program director there to try and recreate how it felt to live with an autoimmune disease. So it was a large-scale installation with sound, video, touch. So actually the person viewing it lies on in the center of the four screens on a bed with a weighted blanket on, so you can't get up out of your position. And again, I wanted to force people to lie down, and as the video progresses, lots of things happen, and it's all about like this idea of feeling heavy, this idea of feeling dizzy. The room starts to spin at one point, and there's also smells. I'd never worked with smells before, so that was a really interesting like addition to the work, thinking about how does psoriatic arthritis smell. And what I kind of came up with was smells like the smell of the hospital. Spending a lot of time in hospital, you get to know that clinical kind of bleachy smell, and then mixing that with the smell of sweat. Again, you can. I was able to go onto a library of smells and choose different smells. So, like spending many, many days in bed, this idea of the smell of sweat in the human body was really kind of potent to me. Um, and this idea of like the smell of pollution, which also smells like coal tar, which is like the shampoo that you use when you've got psoriasis, this like tarry smell. So I was thinking of these smells that like resonate with being unwell. And it was a really interesting like experience. We wanted to try and like use art and multisensorial simulation to facilitate communication between patients and their doctors. So the idea was like to invite clinicians to view this work and put themselves in the position to hopefully incite empathy with people who are unwell. And it's not a direct one-to-one, like this is exactly how it feels, because obviously we can't do that. But I'm really interested in this idea of like art as a way to evoke empathy in people and to gain understanding. And as I mentioned before, if a doctor had listened to how it felt to experience my illness, I feel like I would have got to the point where I was in my journey a lot earlier than I did. And sometimes it is just about you know, listening to your patients and what they experience and their journey through their illness, and they are the experts in their own body and their own illness. Um, and yeah, it was really, really interesting, and loads of clinicians came and viewed it, and even Chris Whitty, the health secretary, came and was like, "Wow, this is could be incredible for healthcare to kind of like force people to view um, illness in a different way, not just diagnostics, not just data, not just blood tests, but actually patient experience at the forefront of diagnosing people as well." Um, and then this is my final one that I'm going to talk about. This I've actually gone backwards slightly in this work, but um, this is a piece of work that I did before this project, going back to this idea of like looking at myself. As I mentioned, a lot of my work previously to making work about chronic illness was about my mental health. And um, I was thinking about photography as a way to capture memories. All of these photographs were taken on a trip to Japan when I went out to Japan with an ex-partner. And after we went through a breakup, I was like, couldn't look at these images anymore. And I loved these images and they were beautiful and they were really special to me, but the meaning of them had changed. And whilst I was going through this breakup, I was writing down how I felt in my notes app on my phone. And JPEG images are like made up of loads of different code. And when you open a JPEG file, you can actually open a file in a text program, and it comes up with just all of the code that is actually makes up these images. And what I did was I put the notes and my feelings and my thoughts into the code of the images, and it glitched the images and broke them. And again, full circle back to that idea of when I was looking at my skin, I was looking at something that felt broken, but I changed my story to that because I made them beautiful. I looked at myself as a specimen of crystals and beauty. And the same with this, like I looked at myself and I was completely broken. But when I put these back into these beautiful photographs, which became something new, and the colors changed. And yes, these images are broken and they are glitched and they're not how they're supposed to be and they're different and they're changed because of what I've embedded into them and the stories that I embedded into them. But they're new and they were beautiful and they are beautiful within themselves, and they change isn't always a bad thing. It changes us and it might break us, but we build ourselves back into something new and beautiful. And that changed the way I viewed these images. Here are some more of them. So they're just landscapes and mountains in Japan. And yeah, I was really interested in how these images changed for me and the meaning of them changed for me by again, this process that I went through of creating difference. So this was a exhibition of the work that I had in 2022 at Art Lacuna. I think that was it.